when I'm speaking about science, I'm trained in English, so that would be easier for some of the terms and stuff. I sometimes can't find the exact word for it in Dutch or pavimento or Spanish.
Okay, it's also fine to code switch. Like if you feel like some things are easier or come to you in Pavimento or in Dutch or in Spanish, then feel free to just mess around with the language, and that's also okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so first we wanted to kind of get a sense of your relationship with the ocean. So, could you maybe share with us some of your earliest memories with the ocean?
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up on Aruba, and we always used to go to the beach a lot. We also lived close to the beach. Um, and when we would go to the beach, Sundays, barbecue with the family, I would just spend all my time underwater basically. And I always loved observing the marine environment because for me it was like entering a whole new world. And I think this observation, it started with shell collection. I had like this shell encyclopedia, and I would like scour the floor for shells and then find out what the Latin name is and see what species it is and stuff like that. And uh, that kind of developed into this um, need to or wants to understand this ecosystem that was kind of disappearing in front of my eyes, um, especially Catalina, Malmok, Arashi. Those were the beaches I was at every week. Um, and the coral there just disappeared within like the 10 years from when I was 5 to 15. The corals basically disappeared. I know there's still like a little patch of Acropora palmatas around Arashi if you go more towards Rancho, like the surf spot, and then you go to the back more to the reef diving spot as well. Um, but yeah, big coral aggregations have basically disappeared from the area, which of course it's very sad, but it really sparked my interest, like what is causing this exactly and what are the processes behind this, and how do coral reefs even form, what are the ideal conditions, what is causing uh, fluctuations in these ideal conditions, or um, basically causing these ideal conditions to break down so that these coral aggregations can't form anymore. And that was basically when I decided, okay, this is what I want to dedicate my life to. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to come to the Netherlands and try and gain more knowledge on the subject.
Um, so I guess you already touched on this, but so what are some of the, I think some of like forming ocean related experiences you had, or very like uh shaping ocean relations that you experiences that you've had that you could share?
Yeah, so I think definitely that slow, but actually in context, pretty fast change over time of basically the coral reefs disappearing. Also, pollution increasing in front of the hotels and stuff as well, like oil slicks from all the motorized boats that were going up and down all day with tourists, and uh, more sewage influx from Bubali Plus. And I remember one time I saw these tourists at fishermen huts that were like taking the like the muddy layer on top of the sand, and they were rubbing it on their faces like, yes, this is very good for a facial mask and stuff like that. They just didn't know that it was actually produced from sewage and oil, and that was kind of forming a top layer on top of the sand there. And yeah, so things like that, kind of the impact actually that us humans, and especially like a local island nation, can have on its surrounding environment, the pressures of tourism, those things were very impactful to me from a young age.
Okay. So, I guess like, do you have any like specific memories, like like the one you shared about the tourists rubbing polluted soil on their faces? Like that you
Uh,
remember that really feel like.
yeah, I remember like I used to hang out at Malmok a lot, like every day after school. Basically, I would you could find me there. It was like a 5-minute bike ride from where I lived. Um, and you now more and more, but back in the day you only had the Jolly Pirates, like one ship, and one time in the afternoon on one location, and you only had Jolly Pirates, you didn't have all the other ships that are there now. um, and they have like the tourists, they go for a snorkel around Mamok, and a lot of the times they kind of just step on whatever they can find their footing on. And I remember one time I was swimming around and looking at things on the reef, and I saw one of them standing on corals, and I got like super mad. I started screaming at them, and uh, they were kind of like, "Whoa, what's this crazy girl going on about?" But things like that. I have a lot of interactions with the tourists from Jolly Pirates, since I was there a lot, and they were there every day as well. Uh, yeah, and just trying to warn them, like about the impacts that they're having, and also trying to kind of strike up conversation with them, also with the fishermen fishing there, the local fishermen, um, that really want to catch sharks. That's like their goal sometimes, not all of them, but uh, so I guess a lot of interactions at Momok, because that's where I was a lot. um, Interactions like that with tourists, with locals as well, because locals always think I'm a tourist because I look super white.
Okay. And so, how would you describe these interactions and the time you spend? It sounds like you spent a lot of time in Malmok when you were a kid. Um, how do you feel that that shaped the person you are today?
um, well, I mean, it's basically set the trajectory for my life, and my career at this point, because I think if I hadn't grown up on Aruba, or the Momok area, I uh, maybe wouldn't have found my like deep-seated passion for wanting to gain knowledge about these super alien ecosystems. um, that probably either would have set in later in life, or I wouldn't have dedicated my life to it, because now I basically um, want to dedicate my life to it, and I've sacrificed a lot to be able to do that as well. um, yeah, if I would have, for example, my mom's Dutch, so I always think like, what would have been like if I would have grown up in the Netherlands and I hadn't grown up on Aruba? Um, I think my life would look very different. So yeah, being in close contact with the ocean has definitely impacted my life substantially. And next to it, kind of being my dreams and aspirations for a career, it's also personally given me a lot. I freedive a lot, which, it's kind of sometimes it's how do you say that? It's compared to meditation. Especially like my last year of VWO, I was meditating every day in the ocean because I was going crazy with like the stress and everything of moving, and making big life decisions. And I was freediving every day, and I also surf a lot. Um, so all my hobbies and passions are basically formed around the ocean, um, and they still are, even though I'm living in Rotterdam at the moment, but hopefully that will change soon.
Just wanted to ask, because you said like from young, you were near the ocean. This also influenced a lot of the interest. Did you see the difference with your peers in that interest, or was it like how
Yeah,
was that in your time of high school?
yeah, sure. I noticed a big difference because I think for a lot of Rubens as well, um, a lot of local people kind of go to the beach like a few times a year or something, and it's like this big family outing, or it's a or you go with friends when you're teenagers, um, or you have the Dutch people that come over and like are windsurfing every day, or um, stuff like that. But I think I was one of the only ones that was just like free diving every day, wanting to be in the ocean every day, wanting to surf. I mean, it's also the surfing community on Aruba is super small, and freediving community. It's getting bigger now. I saw that also some of the dive shops are giving freediving lessons and stuff like that. But when I was growing up, I mean, I was using bodyboard fins because you couldn't buy any freediving fins on the island. You still can't buy them on in my size on the island. Um, and ordering stuff online from America and everything, that was like this huge hassle. And I mean, my family didn't have money for that either. So, uh, yeah, I remember used bodyboard fins. That's how I started freediving. And yeah, the people around me, I went alone a lot of the times, even though it's not super safe. But I went alone a lot of times because I couldn't really find any peers that were also interested in submerging themselves in the oceans as much. People were interested in other things.
A good thing. Not to give away your age, but you said like in a period of your 5 to 15, you saw a big deteriorate change, right? Then what
Yeah.
kind of time frame is that? Is that like 10 years ago? Like how,
So
how
that's from like 2005, 6 until 2000 and
that's when you saw that everything
yeah.
that everything was like disappearing. Or sorry, everything. I mean,
Yeah, so
coral.
like the beginning of the 2000s, that's when I saw like big shifts. So before that, I think around the 80s was already there was already big changes happening in the entire Caribbean, because of the loss of Diadema antillarum, which is like this very important glacier on Caribbean reefs, overfishing, pollution. But I think the beginning of 2000, we started getting more heat waves as well, and things were just going downhill really quickly. And I mean, Aruba naturally, if you compare it, for example, to Curacao and Bonaire, which are very close by, it's formed differently. It's more of a sand plate, while Curacao and Bonaire are more volcanic reef islands. So naturally, Aruba has less reef systems, and more sand. So we didn't have too much to begin with either, um, especially on the north side of the island. I think the south side of the island has a lot more reef systems. Um, but yeah, so the little communities that there were just, there was too much pressure for them to survive so isolated. And I think it was just too much. And I mean, there are still definitely some communities, and I've seen some like weedy coral species, we call them, like more fast growing coral species that are coming back. And I mean, the Acropora palmata, which is a super endangered species, that they still exist in that little patch at Arashi. I find that every time I go back, I'm like, oh my God, they're still here. It's amazing. I get so happy. Yeah.
You mentioned a few different things you do in the ocean, like it's your career right now, it's your hobbies. You mentioned free diving, surfing. So can you share with us a little bit more about the different ways that you interact with the ocean currently?
Yeah, sure. Surfing has always been a big one for me because I really enjoy uh, sports, and especially kind of more adrenaline sports. I guess freediving and diving are also in that category. Every time I have to get a insurance policy for traveling, I'm notified of that fact. But yeah, so surfing is one of the main things. Is even while I was in Europe and I was studying most of the time, I would always try to either surf here, or I would go on surf trips a lot, like to the south of Europe, and freediving there as well whenever I could. I've dived in the Netherlands as well a few times in Zeeland. It's super cool. They have oyster reefs here, so it's a very different type of ecosystem, but still has the same ecosystem principles in a lot of ways, which I find super interesting. So that has some parallels as well. So I'm mainly specialized in tropical systems, but I'm just interested in all marine ecosystems, basically. So getting to know other ecosystems. I've done some trips to Australia and Hawaii and Central America, and kind of getting to know ecosystems there and being able to compare them. I find also super interesting. Just kind of observing ecosystems as well, just snorkeling and stuff like that. I love doing that as well, especially in new systems that I haven't seen yet.
Tell us a little bit more about your research and your studies.
Yeah, so I started with a bachelor in biology at the University of Amsterdam. And so I have a very good basic biology base. And I find that really nice because when I started, I was like, oh, I want to specialize in marine research immediately. But a lot of land-based theory and ecology can be also used for underwater and marine ecosystems, which I can draw from. And during my bachelor's, I did a pretty big internship on Curacao. I've worked with Carmabi a few times, studying the reefs there, and I did a lot on biogeochemical cycling, so kind of the nutrient and energy pathways on reefs and recycling pathways. And I also did a project on Hawaii last year where basically we were comparing, or we were kind of looking at the sponge loop, which is this pathway hypothesis that was created by my supervisor, where basically the idea is that sponges are able to eat dissolved organic matter, which is not available to other organisms. It's actually only available to microbes. And since recently, they found out that sponges can also do that, and they're able to recycle this energy back into the system, which makes it such an efficient biodiversity hotspot because it can keep all of that energy inside. And basically we were looking, does that system also exist on Pacific reefs and specifically Hawaiian reefs? And how does that work? And what is the impact of ocean acidification on these processes on the reefs there? So I was also involved in more of a climate change aspect there as well, which, as we all know, is impacting more and more of the kind of fundamental research of these ecosystems. You can't really find them pristine anymore, especially just because of global warming and ocean acidification. So how are these processes impacting fundamental pathways that we actually don't know everything about yet? How are they impacting it? And what can we find and observe to gain knowledge and find solutions to problems?
We want to do like a next step that I think connects really well with what you've been talking about your research. But I think will be hard for you and also easy for you. So we're doing a systems map. So we're asking everybody to draw the system of the ocean in Aruba to the best of their understanding and capacity, and indicating like which elements are important from their perspective. So kind of, but I imagine that this is a very broad question for you. but we have you ever worked for Jamboard?
Is that on here? I saw that it's a whiteboard jam. I've never worked with it before. Sorry, that's the answer to the question.
So we're gonna share it right now in the chat, and then we're gonna do a screen share so that maybe you can talk to us about it and kind of like work through it. So we usually, you're the first person we've done this online with, but we usually kind of talk
Okay.
about, you know, key elements of the ocean, and then we kind of draw it out. So just like a systems map. So we're looking at, it can be, inorganic elements, it can be organic elements, vegetation, energy cycles, nutrient cycles, but also obviously like, so it can be very broad, but we just want to understand basically the highlights. So how would you explain like the ocean as a system to someone who doesn't know it yet, or to someone you want to share
But
like the best
the
parts of it or the key elements?
the entire ocean or the local ecosystems around Aruba?
Aruba in particular. So if you want to connect that to certain global systems, then but we're looking at Aruba in particular. So the ones that are, you think, essential for explaining Aruba's ocean.
Yeah,
Aruba's
so I
coast.
think yeah, so Aruba, I think that the biggest ecosystems on Aruba are probably mangroves used to be bigger, not really now, but seaweed beds, seagrass beds, and coral reef ecosystems. Since I know more about coral reef ecosystems, I'll try and delve into that. I am on the map now. I can't type anything. It's view only.
And you? Are you sure? Maybe I should
Yeah.
share access. Yeah.
Oh, change speaker to editor.
Okay, we're gonna change viewer to editor, so you should now have access.
Okay.
I'd have to refresh.
Yeah, I'll refresh it. Yes. Okay. So can I type things or do I draw?
Yeah, you
It
can
is.
type, you can draw, you can drop little post-its.
Okay.
The post-it's the easiest way to put something on there. Text box is a bit awkward. And yeah, the pen's big.
Yeah.
The post-it is right under the arrow.
I'm not a very good drawer. I think these can be considered corals-ish. Basically, one of the most important things that I learned during my studies and the research I did is how tightly coupled recycling's pathways are on coral reefs, actually the entire ocean, and all ecosystems on Earth. Everything is reused, recycled. It's the thing that's unique about coral reefs is that it's so nothing goes to waste. Everything is used, and there aren't a lot of resources because tropical seas and oceans are typified by not having a lot of nutrients and not a lot of life in them. That's why they're also so clear. So it's actually Darwin's paradox, the one that he kind of came up with when he was traveling along the Great Barrier Reef. Is he saw this ecosystem and he's like, how is this possible? How is such a biodiverse, rich, productive ecosystem able to subsist and survive in such a kind of marine equivalent to a desert on land? How is that possible? And through a lot of observation and research, we basically figured out, well, it's because of recycling pathways, and then specific recycling pathways are that corals are basically the basis of this food web, and they're able to, through their zooxanthellae, they're able to produce dissolved organic matter, which is oh yeah, you're helping me. That's awesome. This is actually pretty fun. It's like drawing in paint almost.
Yeah.
Mm. So we call it DOM, dissolved organic matter. Microbes. They are able to produce dissolved organic matter. They're basically, these are sugars. They are so efficient, and they produce so much that about 40 to 50% of the dissolved organic matter that they produce, is basically the sugars that they produce, they kind of eject it into the surrounding water column because it's too much for them. They don't need it. And this then becomes dissolved in the water and becomes dissolved organic matter. And this is actually a huge potential energy resource. But the thing is, there aren't a lot of organisms that can take this up. So it's kind of like this wasted resource, right? Like, where does this energy go? And then around 1980, they discovered that microbes are able to take this up. And because they have like a shorter life cycle, they die. And then so this dissolved matter gets transferred into particulate matter, and then these dead microbial cells are then they can be taken up and used as food by bigger organisms like little critters, crabs, fishes, and these then produce poop and nutrients that can again be used by corals. And that's kind of one recycling pathway that's really important also in oceanic systems. They call it the carbon pump there, the biological pump. But basically microbes are forming the basis of the food web based off of these corals. They're actually feeding off of the sugars produced from corals, and through that are able to feed the rest of the trophic levels, the rest of the food web. And the research that I've been working on a bit is that sponges are also able to do this. They are able to do this because they have a very high cell shedding turnover, faster than our intestines. Our intestines cells are able to replace themselves almost. They're known as one of the quickest cell replacements in the world, in the animal kingdom. But sponges can do this even faster. They have a cell turnover of around 3 hours, which is extremely quick. And all these they have these high cell turnovers in their chanocyte cells, which are basically their food uptake cells. They replace them to keep it efficient and healthy. And basically all of this sponge poop, we call it, but it's basically old sponge cells. The sugars get taken up, and then these cells get shed from the energy they get from the sugars. And these cells are then taken up again, just like with the microbes, by small critters and detritivores and bigger organisms like fish. And then this is again given back to corals and other primary producers like algae or seagrass beds. They also need nutrients. Okay, that's my algae and the
Cool.
grass beds. Yeah.
I'll have to post it
Um,
to give clarity.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a invisible pathway. You can't see it really, but it is happening, and it is uh, basically 80% of the energy and nutrients needed in this ecosystem is provided for in this way. And this is something I really enjoyed during my studies learning, because it was, you don't hear about this. It's also pretty complicated stuff. It's not really basic knowledge, but it's also essential for the survival of and the workings of this ecosystem. But it's also invisible to the eye, especially the microbial part. It's super tiny and small. No one can see it. And how do you explain something or research something you can't see? So that was also one of the main reasons why they figured it out so late, because they just didn't have the technology to look into dissolved organic matter. But those technologies are getting better and better and more complicated. But yeah, this is one of the bigger aspects of research I've been working on. And also, I find a very good explanation of how reefs work around Aruba. So if you're talking about, for example, about anthropogenic pressure, pollution, kind of creates nutrient excess, right? So you'll get that this group. Can I change the color? Yeah, that's perfect. This group is gonna get way bigger. You're gonna get a lot more microbes. And more microbes bring a lot of problems. You could theoretically say, yes, there'll be more food for fish and then more nutrients for corals, and more corals will grow. But the thing is that microbes also use oxygen. And dissolved oxygen is also one of the most important parameters when we're studying and observing reefs, because they're living organisms and they need oxygen. They produce oxygen, but they also need oxygen to survive. And so microbes, if they grow very quickly due to this nutrient excess, they're respiring so much that they're actually using all of the dissolved oxygen in the surrounding area, which can create oxygen dead zones. And this can cause coral disease, coral death, stuff like that, since they're not mobile, they're stationary. So this has a very negative impact on the coral itself. So that is one of the things that we're seeing on Aruba as well, is the local sewage pollution that I was talking about at Bubali Plus from the over-tourism, is having an invisible detrimental effect to the reefs. Something you can't see, but it is happening, and you see it disappearing, and you're like, how is it disappearing, and what exactly is happening? Because I can't see anything that's happening. But actually what's happening is what we call this in research, we gave the term microbialization. I'll put a little sticky note. Microbialization. Basically that the ocean is getting more and more microbes that are using more and more oxygen, which are creating these oxygen dead zones, where nothing can grow basically, and everything's dying and getting sick. So yeah, that's one of the things I noticed around the island, and on a lot of degraded reefs, also on Curacao, where I did some work. The Carmabi Research Station is at the opening of a bay where there's raw sewage flowing into the ocean, and you also see it on the reefs in front there. They're just really not what they used to be anymore. They've really had a decline, and it's definitely because of pollution. There's also been a study done on Curacao along the entire coastline, and they compare, for example, Willemstad, which is more polluted and has a lot more pollution going into the local waters there, to, for example, East Point and the north side of the island. And you see that the amount of pollution has a strong correlation with the health of the reefs. And that's because of these kind of processes that are happening.
Been a really interesting map, and interestingly enough, it even connects to some of the questions that we've heard from other people we interviewed where they've noticed changes, but of course, because these are invisible, they're questioning, like, what is happening? Why do we see these changes? So that's really nice. Thank you for that. I think then we'll go to the next. Oh yeah, so the next element for this map was to look at, so you already started with the anthropogenic introduction of nutrient access. But where else are there other places where you would add people as an element of this system?
As in add people to this ecosystem in a way that it's healthy, or what is exactly the question?
Of your understanding of humans' role in this system.
Well,
specific organization.
Yeah, including if you know specific organizations, if you know people that are working towards improving it or that are making it worse. Are there particular human organizations, institutions, specific people that you find that intersect or interact with the cycle you've described?
Well, so I've been working in research and academia a lot, and especially more kind of the fundamental research side. And there it's more observing what's happening and trying to understand the system more. And although this is super necessary work, and is also a field I would like to continue working in, it gives more knowledge. If you understand something better, you can help it better, right? But a lot of the times people get stuck in this, it's like my study object, and I don't want to influence my study object. And a lot of the times scientists also don't really want to give strong or hard opinions about stuff because they're afraid it'll be taken too literally, etc. But this knowledge can, of course, be used in conservation and restoration efforts, which are already being used worldwide, especially for example, CCOR, coral restoration organizations that are using microbes to help corals settle, to give a more healthy environment for corals. There are also microbial observation packets, so that you sample the water, and basically dependent on your microbial community in the water there, you can tell how degraded it is, what exactly are the stressors in this area, what can be done, stuff like that. So microbial research within research, but also within conservation, is something that I think definitely help our restoration and conservation efforts. And the question was also if there are things that are not helping, right?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier that the nutrient access is an anthropogenic factor. So can you elaborate on the anthropogenic interference in the system in this case? So what type of groups or people or developments are most connected to this nutrient access, or if there's other also elements of intervention, like you mentioned some from your personal experiences that may or may not interact, but kind of linking in the human in the system, I think. Because we often think of ourselves as outside of it, right? Like,
yeah, we're definitely part of it. And I think that thought that we're outside of it, that we're too small to have an influence on such a big part of the earth, is where the problem started. And I actually see it's also this whole theory within ecology. Are humans part of nature or not? That's like a whole field of research on itself. But yeah, the humans are definitely part of this system, and the nutrient excess is definitely because of overuse, definitely because of, on Aruba then, the Bubali Plus issue is basically because of the hotels and the immense amount of tourism and tourists that are coming to the islands, and the sewage refining process can't handle the volumes that are coming through every day, so they just dump it because there isn't any money to upscale Bubali Plus and have it be able to clean the water for that many people. So it's definitely also a socioeconomic, money issue. If there would be enough money, they would fix it, but there isn't. And then that again ties into the whole political scene, which is, dramatic. So yeah, it's very intersectional, this problem, and it's not something that can be solved from one viewpoint. It's something that needs a lot of collaboration from all sides. And even then it might not be enough, but the doomsday kind of thinking isn't going to get you anywhere. And there's still a lot of hope, because corals in itself are super resilient, super cool organisms. They're one of the oldest as well. They have survived so much, and they're so resilient, and there's so many ways that they have creatively come up with to survive. So there's definitely hope. We're just putting too much pressure on the ecosystem.
then I would say you also mentioned like conservation organizations and academics. Do you see are there some examples of that you can point out in Aruba that you know of? Or do you feel like this is a gap that Aruba needs to fill that's not there right now?
I think there's definitely a gap. Scubble Bubbles, when they started, I was super hyped about it. Because it's also a money thing, right? There isn't really money going towards that kind of work. But Scubble Bubbles, it started with volunteers. And I also like that they're very open to everyone that wants to join and can join. And they started with, coral restoration in the easiest sense, which is just asexual reproduction, just, breaking off corals and letting them grow, and hopefully getting enough, outplanting again, kind of helping the reef in that way. You guys started Brenchies, which is also really cool. The University of Aruba got some money from, I also think from the Resenbid Fund, and they have some PhD students. The FNPA, this Fundación Nacional Parque Aruba, is also doing a lot more work in terms of their marine parks. They have a whole proposal plan in place and are working on restoration efforts. I know they just placed some reef infrastructure, like these artificial reef beds created by reef systems. They're like this startup in the Netherlands that are creating these octagonal tubes basically, and they're putting like a whole bunch of them on the floor, and then they want scuttle bubbles to colonize it with corals to kind of kickstart the restoration process, and then kind of get an artificial reef system going there. So there are definitely some efforts, and a lot more money going towards it compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And you know, when I said I wanted to be a marine biologist, everyone's like, you will never get a job here. You'll definitely have to go abroad. But I think that the opportunities are definitely changing on the island, and there's a lot more going on there in terms of organizations and research. But definitely more can be done, especially in terms of research and observation. That's why I find Brenchy so cool, because you guys, there isn't really any long-term data sets around Aruba of the ecosystems there. So that is something that you really want when you're trying to restore these systems, because you want to know, okay, what's the baseline? What did it used to look like? Where do we want to go? Things like that.
All right, thank you. If you go to the next page of the ocean mapping on page 2, you'll see Tony try to draw out some of the human systems he discussed. So maybe take a look and see if that kind of makes sense, or if you make any adjustments, feel free.
Yes. Well, I think the tourists is also like a money problem, right? Because money is kind of like our main income is tourism. So how do you still provide ample jobs and income for your local population while also not putting too much pressure on your local ecosystems that you rely on, especially if tourism is your main income? So yeah, finding a balance in that is, I find it's very hard, because people are also very opinionated about this. I went to one of the first meetings of the Marine Park initiative when they were trying to decide, okay, what are the marine parks going to be? We want input from the locals. Like, what do you guys think? And a lot of fishermen are, you know, really mad that they want to make basically their fishing grounds the marine park, because they're like, hey, we basically don't have a lot of influence on this is our main livelihoods. How are we going to do that if we can't fish anymore? Or people that work in the hotels and needed to support their family of 5, you know, how you can't say like, let's do less tourism because it's bad for the ecosystems, and then expect people to be okay with that if they're out of a job. So yeah, it's so interconnected, again, socioeconomically, with the situation of the island. So maybe this is better. Ooh. Like this. Coral planting. Yeah, but I mean, for the rest, it's it looks pretty good.
Thanks.
Mm.
Okay, I think then we can wrap this part up and go to the next question. So now we want to jump a little bit into the future. Do you have the next question? Yeah. So if you think about the future, right? So if we try to think now for the year 2000 to 2100, What does the ocean around Aruba look like? Or how has it changed?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think the warming will probably have caused basically all the coral communities to die out. I think you'll still have like some weedy species around. They have a lot more sponges on the reefs. They're talking about like sponges and gorgonians are a lot more resilient to ocean warming and acidification. So you'll probably have a lot more like gooey reef systems. So not like hard scleractinian corals, but more macroalgae, sponges, gorgonians, maybe some small weedy scleractinian species. And I mean, it also depends on the research. The conservation and restoration efforts. Because, for example, if you have a reef like that, but you have a big fish population on your reefs, maybe there will also be more corals that have over time kind of evolved to be able to survive the super high temperatures and marine heat waves and stuff like that. But I think they will definitely be around, especially if there's some assisted evolution work going on. But yeah, I think that's kind of what the reefs will look like. And if there's not anything done on in terms of pollution either, you'll probably have like a a lot more influx of algae. And I mean, this is also the effect of the wider Caribbean on Aruba. So for example, sargassum, that's also becoming a problem due to warmer temperatures, and that just kind of dat spoelt gewoon aan, zeg maar, on the coast of Aruba. The plastic problem, which, you know, is also definitely a problem that also just shows up on the coast. Yeah, but so in terms of underwater, sponge, gorgonian reefs, hopefully with some fish, and maybe some small pockets of corals here and there, like hard scleractinian corals. That would be cool if they're still around on Aruba then.
And how do you think about Aruba itself? How do you imagine it in 2100? I mean, now that our territory is more ocean than land, but if you think of because you discussed previously also a lot of the land-based sources of pollution and stuff, how would Aruba's how would Aruba look like?
If there
kind of
was
an intersection.
If there was less pollution and less pressure, was that the question? I couldn't hear you super well.
Just your guess, like how do you imagine it? If you think of Aruba in 2100, what do you imagine?
Like best case scenario, or just imagination?
Just your guess, like your honest opinion.
But I mean, that's what I just said, right?
Well, you said for the underwater part, so I'm wondering, like, as a as a person living on land, what do you imagine?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Well, I
mean,
a
lot of
there's a
the
lot
problems
more...
you described before were connected to,
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there are ever more projects. Every time I come back to visit family, there's like, some new apartment complexes here. They're building the hotel in San Nicolas. I hope they'll stop and realize that there are limited amounts of land, and that there also has to be space for the people living on the island. You can't have an ever-growing society on an infinite piece of land. So I think that will definitely, like, I mean, when I was a kid, I could go into the Mondi in my backyard, and, you know, walk for hours and, you know, only be in the Mondi. And now there's like this very thin strip of Mondi where you can basically see the houses on the other side already, just like encroachment on nature, by development. I think there will be a lot more development on the island, a lot less room for nature, and development usually goes hand in hand with pollution, degradation of ecosystems, coastal erosion, which is also a huge problem because, you know, we already don't have that much land, and because of sea level rise, most likely there will be even less land. Especially some of the houses like around Boca Catalina and Arashi, I'm like, oh, you guys are a little bit too close to the coast there. Don't know if you guys are gonna survive the next 100 years. Yeah. And I mean, these are things like ocean warming and sea level rise. Those are things that are definitely happening, even if everything goes well from this point to the future. Like, those processes are already in motion, and it's gonna take time for them to stop if everything stops. So, yeah. The How do you say it? The tipping points, I think that's what they call it in IPCC. The tipping points have already been reached, most likely, and the irreversible chain reaction has already been set in motion. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what that looks like. I think definitely more droughts as well. More droughts, more intense rainfalls and storms. Which, if you have a very developed piece of land and you don't have room for the water to go, all your ROI systems are gone because you built hotels and apartment complexes in the ROIs, you know, or houses. The water won't be able to go anywhere. So you'll get more flooding, etc. All those problems. And especially with intense rain events, like all of the stuff on land, the pollution, etc., is just being washed into the coastal ecosystems. So coral reefs, but also seagrass beds and mangroves. So yeah, the land is definitely connected to the coast and underwater ecosystems. They're not separate.
Thank you. So I think very, yeah, kind of complete answer. We want to kind of do a second version of this, so we're going to do it 3 times, but it's slightly different. So now we want to ask you what the best case scenario is, for Aruba and its ocean. So if we think, 2100 again, but now be like very idealistic, like, what do you think is feasible? And then what's your dream scenario?
Okay, dream scenario in terms of if we would just pump a lot of money and funding into conservation and restoration. I mean, Secor is also, for example, working on coral husbandry on bigger scales. And there are other organizations around the world that are also trying to kind of scale up coral restoration practices. So it would be sick if you could bring that to Aruba and, you know, increase the genetic variation of your corals there so that they're more resilient to whatever may come, global warming, ocean acidification, pollution, whatever. Give them a fighting chance, you know, actively restore and outplant corals the entire time, year round. Secor is already doing this on Curacao, but you would want to have that on Aruba as well. Maybe a collaboration. That would be amazing if like the ABC Islands just work together. Uh, um, yeah. Then you might still, by 2100, even with ocean warming and acidification, you might still have like some small pockets and communities of scleractinian corals around the island that could be healthy, especially if you curb pollution, because pollution and definitely overfishing are probably the biggest problems right now. So if you can curb that locally, the coral ecosystems will be a lot more resilient to other factors like global climate change, around Aruba, around the island, but in the entire world. If you curb local stressors like pollution and overfishing, ecosystems can be a lot more resilient. So that would be awesome, especially the overfishing as well. You definitely want to curb that. Try and find a way to make it a no-take zone around the island or something. I mean, there's barely, the fishers that are still fishing are barely catching enough to sustain a livelihood. So it will be awesome if, coming back to the intersectionality, to find a replacement employment for these people that are still doing this, so that they don't lose their livelihoods, but also protecting the ecosystems. There are a lot of local communities that are, for example, letting fishermen do tourist tours as a form of alternative income, or they let fishers become basically ecosystem stewards and sea ranger patrollers, kind of making them and then when the ecosystem has bounced back, that they can reap the benefits of the work that they have put into their own backyard. Things like that. I think a lot of local action could probably cause the reefs to be a lot more resilient, so that when in 2100, when sea level is rising and everything's way too warm and there are way too many marine heat waves and ocean acidification is going crazy, you can still have some pockets of healthy coral. Yeah, that would be an ideal situation.
Mentioned the curb pollution. Can I ask a little bit more, like what specific types of pollution are you thinking about?
Yeah, definitely sewage. Local
If you could-
sewage pollution is, I think, the biggest problem around Aruba. Local sewage, but also industrial pollution. So you have, for example, the old rafineria, which is just, leaching so many heavy metals in the surrounding waters, and other the dump at Parquita Boss is also not helping. Uh, those are, I think, the three biggest polluting sources on the island. If you could find a way to curb that pollution, you would be a whole lot further in terms of coral reef resiliency.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's also aligned with what you said before. What makes this ideal scenario hard to accomplish? I think you had a lot of very practical, like ideas. Nothing seems too, far-fetched or futuristic. But what makes this hard?
Money. I mean, we're independent state within the Dutch kingdom, so we're self-governing, but this also means we don't have the same support as, for example, Bonaire. We are eligible for some EU funding, but it's also, we're in the Caribbean, so I think that because it's like this gray area in terms of government, that it becomes harder to pump money into these things, and money is usually the problem. If you have money, you can hire a bunch of PhD students and research assistants that could set up a whole program for there can be one team working on curbing pollution, another team working on curbing overfishing locally, and another team can be working on active restoration efforts, and you can have another team working on monitoring. But yeah, these people need to pay rent and food. So, if you want people to invest their time in projects like this, and you need a way to finance their livelihoods, otherwise it's just not going to happen. So yeah, find a way to get some funding into it, or find a way to make it to make revenue off of it. A lot of people are also doing like that tourists help in some way, since we're so dependent on them, that they also have, once you enter Aruba, that you have to pay like a fee for entering the islands that goes to research and monitoring and restoration efforts, for example. That could be something that could be tried. I don't know. Find a way to get money for this. Because that's also a thing, getting the money to actually go to this. Because Aruba also has a way of becoming crooked in these things, and people put money in their own pockets because there aren't a lot of people that are rich on the island, and even rich people do it. So yeah, people's greed, it's hard to get around that.
Do you think you see something like that could make this more likely to happen? Like, well, if we set this up, then that could accelerate the process in the right direction. Like, what could be kind of like a pivoting point, I guess?
Well, I think definitely somehow getting the tourists involved would, in money wise, like they already pay so much money for their flight to the island, their stay in the hotel. They go out to eat every night. They have like 10 pina coladas on the beach, and they do a bunch of other activities. They go off-roading. I don't know what they do. If you can get every tourist that comes to the island to pay a small contribution fee, I think you would already have a small starting budget that you can do something with. Combine that with just collaboration is so important as well. Just collaboration between the islands, other Caribbean nations, which has been notoriously hard because of, the colonizing past. But yeah, collaboration is something that will help enormously, because you want to set up something, but it's been done a million times before by other institutions and organizations that already exist. And if they could help you, it will just be 10 times easier to start it up in a new location.
That's good because you also mentioned the possibility, like, of work being done in Curacao, where we might be able to connect to, as an example. And now, we focus a little bit on the best case scenario. What do you see as the worst case scenario for 2100?
The worst case scenario is just stinky water, no life but microbes, a microbial soup, basically. Everything's all like structures, like hard coral structures have been melted away, overgrown by algae, a lot of like oxygen dead zones because of too much respiration of microbes, too much nutrient influxes. Yeah, kind of like a microbe soup. That's like the worst case scenario. That the ocean isn't clear anymore, but that it's just like vague green, and you don't want to even get in because it's just a microbe soup.
And what, in that case, does Aruba look like? in the part where people live.
In the
If that
what? In the
happens.
part where?
People
Yeah,
live like on the land.
like Aruba has a lot of strong currents around the island, so I think that also helps in terms of, you know, flushing out pollution and stuff like that. But I think you'll definitely have local zones of pollution, for example, where all the mangroves are. I think the mangroves will probably be gone because they're either cut down for development or they can't survive in the polluted waters. Seagrass beds will basically become algae beds. Um, you know, we probably won't see as many turtles or only dead turtles washed up on the shore. Just getting very grim. um, yeah, no corals. That definitely like the south side of the island would just be like one huge coral graveyard, with just overgrown with algae. Yeah, and basically in front of the hotels right now, that's pretty bad how it is right now. Just like the sand is gray or black and the water is murky, and that's basically already kind of like a microbe soup that just extending beyond the hotel area to other sandy places. Yeah, that would definitely be worst case scenario.
And so you're saying that the hotel area already looks like this. So do you think that would have any impact on tourism?
I mean, if it hasn't already, you know, like we don't know exactly what impact it is having right now because there aren't really any studies done on it. But I mean, it can't be nice if people can pick other places compared to Aruba, where, you know, water, like what people want is a white sandy beach and clear waters where you can swim in, you know, with a pretty view. That's what people want. If you can't give them that, they'll just go somewhere else where you can get that. And that money of the tourism will go somewhere else. So it's vital for Aruba to invest in nature restoration and conservation also for their financial needs in the future.
When you think of this worst case scenario, do you think of other steps that we can take to avoid this worst case that you didn't mention before? Are there new thoughts that come up?
Um,
Or is it different, like avoiding a worst case scenario, is it different than reaching a best case scenario, or would it be?
yeah, I think there's definitely a difference in avoiding worst case scenario and reaching best case scenario, because reaching best case scenario is just so, I think so much money and effort has to be pumped into projects to reach that. And if you look worldwide, I mean, for example, the Great Barrier Reef, you know, Australia is pretty rich in terms of money, and they're pumping so much money into the Great Barrier Reef, and they're trying all kinds of ways to protect it. And it still isn't the best case scenario. So I think just avoiding worst case scenario, that's doable. Still a lot of work, but I think it's
What do we
definitely
do?
doable. For pollution,
So what do you see as the main actions
as
for avoiding the
as
worst
a
case?
reaction for avoiding worst case is
I'll
kind
just
of what I said before. Sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, so what would be those actions to avoid the worst case?
To avoid worst case, I would definitely, so what I said before, you want to curb pollution, you want to do something about overfishing, so like the local stressors, you know, and kind of make the environment as ideal as you can. so taking away all of the stressors, the biggest local stressors, because global warming and ocean acidification, I mean, Aruba as an island can stop their emissions, but that's not going to make the big ones like America, Europe, Asia do it as well. That's more on the world game. But if you can locally reduce stressors like pollution, overfishing, and other local stressors, you will have a higher resiliency of your ecosystem and therefore not a worst case scenario, hopefully.
So it would be like the main things, well, part of the elements you also discussed for the best case, but then without all of the effort on coral restoration and conservation.
Yeah, so just, basically that if you wouldn't even invest in coral restoration and conservation, but just try and take the bad things out of the equation, I think that would already do a lot, because nature in itself is resilient and they will find a way.
I think that's helpful, you know. And we found a good overlap. Now, I have a few prompts, so just kind of like tell me the first thing that comes to your mind if I say tourism in 2100 in Aruba. Like it's always in Aruba and our coast, like not
Okay.
How do you see it?
Just one word.
One word, but like just yeah. How do you imagine tourism in 2100?
Overcrowding and people as ants, or like deserted, absolutely deserted, because it's just too hot, can't do anything anymore.
What do you think of science and technology in 2100 in relation to Aruba and its ocean?
Upgraded, next level, futuristic.
All right. What do you think about climate change in 2100 in relation to Aruba and its ocean?
Super boiling, literally. I think the ocean will feel like a jacuzzi. A jacuzzi. I mean, it already does. Floods. Yeah. Jacuzzi and floods.
Economics in 2100 in Aruba and its ocean.
Only economics?
Yeah, just what does that make me think about? You hear like the economics of 2100 in Aruba. It's going to be a talk. You're not going yet, so you're like, but you have some assumptions. What do you expect?
I hope that they figure out a way to make tourism not the biggest income. I don't know how they're going to do that, but I feel like they will figure it out by 2100. That basically, I think that would be very huge.
Right. What do you think about policy in Aruba and its ocean in 2100?
I think what's that word? Vooruitstrevend, maar niet haalbaar. So, you'll have a lot of policies in place, but, if they're actually being enforced, that's the question.
What do you think about food in 2100 in Aruba and its ocean? Did you
I hope
discuss
they'll just
fishermen for a little bit?
Yeah, I hope they'll just like replace one of the hotels with like this huge hotel where they just grow their own food. and that there's also in this hotel like a land-based aquaculture system or something. I don't know. That would be sick.
What do you think about biodiversity in 2100 in Aruba and its ocean?
I think it'll be lower, but it will also it won't go away, but it'll be very different to what it is now.
What do you think urban culture and identity will look like in 2100 in relation to its ocean?
Less closed-minded and ignorant, and more in tune with the rest of the world.
Now we have the last section, so we're almost done. What would you like if you could send a message to the future? Like from now, we have like a time machine, you send like a message to someone in 2100. What would you tell them about the ocean today?
Send them a message about the ocean today. I hope you guys put that cryo lab in place for your coral reef samples, because they're probably going to be gone, and now's your chance to do it.
Great. What would you like if you could take a picture or of a part of the ocean or a element of the ocean and send it to 2100 to kind of like, I don't know, what would you send?
Of Aruba, the ocean around Aruba. I would send the Acropora fields and be like, I hope they're still there.
All right. Is there a question that you think we should have asked that we haven't asked?
Ooh, no, I think there were a lot of questions. I don't know. I can't think of it right now.
What are some things that you are grateful for of the ocean?
I'm grateful that it gives me peace. It gives me energy, and it inspires me constantly.
Is there someone else you recommend us to talk to?
Ooh, like of Aruba, I don't know, but there's this student that I did my study with. She's from Curacao. So she's more focused on Curacao and everything there. But, you know, in the spirit of collaboration, she just started a PhD in New Zealand, and she's still going to be doing research on Curacao and so the Caribbean. But she's looking more at mesophotic and deep sea coral reef ecosystems. So that might be cool, because, you know, you don't really look at that, but it's there, and around Aruba as well, and it's still relevant.
That would be really
So yeah,
cool.
I can give you her name. Her name.
It fell out, but I got the name.
Yeah,
Is there anything
awesome.
you think we should read, follow, watch, like documentaries, books, articles, social media accounts?
Read, follow. Well, I would just sometimes check Kermabi's website. They have like annual reports they bring out, also about, for example, coral spawning times and stuff like that. That might be cool also for Scubble Bubbles. And also in terms of you guys are doing a lot of observation work, they also have longer observation timelines. And since it's a neighboring island, you know, some of that can be very similar and useful. So yeah, that.
Where would you recommend us to go? In the ocean in Aruba?
Where to go? Well, you guys are at Surfside a lot. I don't know if you guys go to other sides of the island, or are you guys more focused on we want to figure it out in Surfside, and then once we figure it out, we're gonna go to the rest of the island.
I mean, we go everywhere, but Aruba's small. But Surfside's our pilot site. It's related to the funding, and it's easier to test everything in one location first. But that's more towards our data collection. But just like a location in Aruba, you think we should see to like help us experience the ocean? Or...
Well, that the strip between Mangal Alto and Rogers Reef, I really love that strip. There's just some pretty good, healthy coral systems there. And I mean, so the acroporas at the Arashi sides, if you can find them, they're hidden.
Oh.
But yeah, that's always nice
We
to
went
look
there
at.
recently.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's so nice.
And then yeah, lastly, what do you recommend we do to improve our connection to the ocean?
I think observation is honestly one of the best things you can do. So just being in or around the ocean every day can be very helpful. So yeah, kind of one of the reasons why I don't want to be in Rotterdam. It's nice to be around the thing you're studying or interested in.
For sure. I do. There are some interesting non-European programs in the region now. Be it like the US and Puerto Rico and like the University of the West Indies in Colombia. There's like a pretty good program that allow you to be more immersed.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm also looking for a job now, so we'll see where it takes me.
Cool. I'll tag you because that some things do come across. I think I've recently had some research positions that and I'll know that you're looking for something and I'll forward it.
Oh
It
yeah,
might not be
cool,
exactly, but just ocean related.
Yeah,
All right.
always nice to have tips.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Is there anything else
problem.
you think? But this
Uh,
was the
with the prompt you asked me of the technology prompt of what I think DIY is should definitely be part of that. So kind of what you guys are doing. So because we're an island nation, right? It's everything. Nothing's in stock. You have to ship it from somewhere. So it's also kind of trying to find a creative solution to problems with like limited supplies. That'll always be unique to Aruba and all island nations. Yeah. I think yeah, I forgot to say that, but I definitely want to have that in there. Yeah, no, I think that was everything. It was very thorough, but I enjoyed talking to you guys.
thank you. We enjoyed it too. It was nice meeting you.
Super.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. Have a nice rest of the day, guys.
Yes.
Enjoy the sun.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Bye.